Welcome to the Paxata webinar, where we'll cover the 4 reasons not to use Excel to prepare data for enterprise analytics. Here's the agenda. Take a look and get comfy because it's going to be a quick ride, but we'll cover lots of ground. So let's get right to it. The 4 reasons. By the way, Bill Lumbergh can't even stand using Excel to prepare data. Reason 1. Manual and error-prone issues. In my former life as a data analyst, I often found myself using Excel pivot tables, sorting deduped columns, reviewing lots of filters, and other awkward techniques to profile data and make quick and dirty changes before pushing it into one of my favorite BI applications. And let me tell you, it took forever. In fact, on multiple occasions, I went over budget or spent too much time on a project because of this particular situation. So this often happens due to manually entered data or to data that is consolidated from multiple source systems. Now here's another scenario where imagine you have a nice clean spreadsheet like this one, the goal of which is to prove that total journal entry activity for the quarter reconciles to the trial balance. Well, switching over to the formula view, if you've ever done it, we see the underlying lookup references, the business logic, and complexity. And we all love to use the formula fill down, right? But what happens if you inadvertently change a cell? Sometimes a manual cell update is intentional, such as replacing those #n/a errors, or the younger Excel users might call it the #n/a errors. Those errors are just obnoxious, aren't they? And what happens if a cell with general ledger information is changed manually? Bad things, let me tell you. Now let's talk about the limitations. The data limitations of Excel, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Even if you are using the latest version of Excel, or Power BI for that matter in worksheet mode, your data will be truncated just after reaching 1,000,000 rows. Ever run into these errors? Feels like a slap in the face sometimes. Now, how about importing data into Excel? It works well for structured flat files and SQL databases, but not much more than that. Imagine getting data from your data lake or Amazon S3 or some other non-Microsoft source. Odds are it will be less than graceful. And most of us don't know how to or want to deal with connection properties, server names, buckets, keys, tokens, the list goes on. Number 3, what does collaboration look like in Excel? Well, for most of us, it's emailing one or more Excel files as attachments. Can you say spreadsheet silo? What does workflow reuse and automation look like? Yes, the infamous macro and its cruel older stepsister, VBA. Now, I don't know if you've ever bothered to learn VBA to attempt automating some menial tasks, but it's not very friendly. What with the arbitrary error messaging, random element naming, and confusing documentation. Luke, for one, was not happy. 4th reason, lack of process transparency. And this might be the worst one. There is no actual data lineage, and the audit trail, if you can call it that, is not terribly useful, not to mention fleeting. Especially since each of these operations is applied to any active worksheet that you have open at the time. And once you close the spreadsheet, there is no way you can undo a manual change. As one of my coworkers likes to say, with Excel, there is no forgiveness. You may have encountered these issues and these errors before. Very frustrating. Ah, yes, versioning in Excel. We do it ourselves. It can be an ugly sight for some of us. Now I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about enterprise scenarios. There are a wide variety of business-critical scenarios that include Excel-based data preparation processes. These processes suffer from the 4 weaknesses I previously described and much more. And some of these include things such as financial crime compliance, customer data onboarding, 360-degree view of customer, and you get the idea. The patterns apply across the board. Excel is slow, it's manual, there's no data lineage, it's limiting my data and my sources, and it's error prone. One of our customers, one of the largest banks in the world, they are 150 years old. They work in 67 different markets. And the problem with them is they got a big problem. And that is over the last 10 years, they have been fined close to $1 billion for a variety of different issues around anti-money laundering. And so they had an initiative to see if Paxata could help them with their AML use cases and regulatory use cases and do it in a way that would significantly reduce the amount of time it took them to do this work. They have thousands of analysts, and they would have 150,000 transactions pending a preliminary review, each one taking about 15 to 30 minutes. In fact, there was one definition of client across 43 countries for regulatory purposes. So heavy dependence on Excel and manual, non-repeatable processes that lacked auditability. So let's see how this particular use case evolved. Who are the key stakeholders here? Well, in their case, they have what they call their FCC team, which is the Financial Crimes and Compliance Organization. And that comprises a few business teams. One for AML, one for politically exposed persons, which is that the bank should not be doing business with people who are on the naughty list, and one for travel and expense fraud. And then there's an entire team called the MI team, who are the business analysts who are preparing the various reports. And each one of these folks, you can see, there are a variety of ratios here of the number of people. So there's 70 MI folks, 1,700 Excel power users, all in their end user compute group. So quite complex. This is their process in their organization before Paxata. And I bet most of you on this webinar have a process that might look something like this. They got their raw source data, the business teams put in a ticket, the production support team Excel extracts, then the extracts go to one of the hub teams review it, then give it to one of the MI teams do a bunch of spreadsheet manipulations, and finally they get their reports. Each one of their cycles was taking 25 million rows and increasing by the month, by the way. All of this is primarily done using Excel. It is not repeatable. That poor IT team is constantly being pushed to do more and more extracts. This process took this customer 21 days to run on a regular basis. So we'll come back to this and share how applying Paxata to the problem had a dramatic impact on this process. Now, I'd just like to spend a minute talking about Paxata and how it came to be. Paxata was founded here in Silicon Valley and has expanded rapidly to include additional offices in the US. Last year, we launched in the Asia-Pacific region, and this year we are expanding into Europe. As you've seen, Paxata is an enterprise-grade platform, and it can be delivered in one of three ways: as a multi-tenant SaaS offering, using a VPC in the cloud, or installed on-premise. We serve the Fortune 1000 and the Global 2000. And though our solution is very horizontal, we have gained a lot of traction in specific industries such as financial services, retail, CPG, healthcare, and business professional services. And as we grow, we've secured strategic investments from companies like Intel, Microsoft, Cisco, and Deutsche Telekom, which helps us maintain our strong focus on the enterprise. So what's the problem we're solving? Well, as you all know, we're drowning in data but thirsting for information. We're making decisions with wholly inadequate information, and we lack the tools to quickly turn data into information. So we're all used to being in an enterprise context, pulling data from CRM systems, ERP systems, and the like, and we've developed strong practices around taking that data and turning it into information. But what happens when we start adding machine data or social media data or any of a variety of new data sources in formats like JSON and XML, and we want to turn that into information? For us, the difference between raw data and the information is how do we take raw data and make it complete so that you have the full data set necessary to make the business decision? How do you make it clean so that the syntax is standardized and the semantics are normalized across all the data sets you're working with? How do you make it contextually relevant to the business problem you need to solve at hand? That context often comes from third-party data sets that you use to enrich with your internal transactional data, that you can add a lot of business meaning to what you're working on. And finally, even if you do those first three things, if you can't consume the information, if you can't make it useful in a BI tool or analytical application or predictive model, then it's not very useful to you. So for us, raw data becomes information when it's complete, clean, contextual, and consumable. Now, the mission of Paxata is to deliver the only enterprise-grade data preparation platform that lets everyone transform raw, meaningless data into valuable, contextual, and complete information. And it's a self-service system which helps turn data into information with clicks and not code in just a matter of minutes and not months, or 3 weeks as the case may be. It weaves together the ability to gather data, explore it, clean it, join it, and shape it, all using one integrated, interactive suite, and be able to publish that data to any destination or data source that people want to work on, and do so on top of any number of environments people are working with today, so whether that be on-premise or in the cloud or even a hybrid model. Now, this is my favorite part, the live demo. So as we go along, I encourage you to consider how this use case might be accomplished if we were using Excel, and I'll highlight some of those capabilities. So I'm going to jump over to my browser, and accessing Paxata is always through an HTML5 browser, whether it's installed on-premise or deployed in the cloud. And I'm about to start a new project. So you can see the goal here is for me to identify potential money laundering activity based on high-risk accounts and transaction patterns. So let's go ahead and open this new shell of a project. You can see I've got no steps here. So let's begin by bringing in the transactional data. That brings me to the data library, where data governance is enforced in Paxata, allows me to find the data I'm looking for. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and start with this transactional data that I loaded in recently. And notice it's 12.7 million records. So I'd like to emphasize that we'll be working on the full population, all 12.7 million records within the grid. And the nice thing is it looks and feels a lot like Excel, but at the same time provides built-in capabilities and intelligence that allows us to avoid those 4 weaknesses that we outlined earlier. So I'm going to enable pattern and range highlighting in this scenario, and you'll start to notice interesting characteristics about the data, things such as outliers, mins, max, repeating values, dupes, nulls, the type of things you want to be able to identify as quickly as possible when you're doing a profiling exercise. And this might be the first time anybody in the company is looking at this data. Great. So I've got 12 million records here. And by the way, let me just emphasize that I've got access to any record in the grid. And this is through our use of adaptive windowing, which allows us just to see that portion of the data that we need within the grid. So that's going to be extremely useful in helping me to work with this data and essentially feel like I'm working with a monster Excel spreadsheet. All right, so the first sanity check I want to do is to make sure we don't have any duplicate transaction IDs. I'm going to come here to the drop-down, and here you can see what we're talking about with clicks and not code. A lot of the things you might do in Excel, you might need functions for. You might have to resort to complex formulas. In this case, it's just a click away. And a couple of these are particularly powerful. So this first one allows me to generate what we call a filtergram in Paxata. So a filtergram is our clever way of saying it is both a filter and a histogram of the distribution of values in that column, and it's semantically aware. So based on the data type, we'll get a certain view of the data. In this case, a simple bar chart is going to be most helpful. And notice that I'm seeing all 12.7 million unique values here loaded in this window. My data quality window helps me understand things such as the fact that all the values are populated, that's the green, they're all of the same type, and that type is text. And by the way, you might have seen this right off the bat, 2 duplicates are found in this transactional data. So we literally found some needles in this massive data haystack. And let's take a look. We see we've got 2 duplicate transactions. They look like true dupes. In other words, all the columns have matching values. I'm just going to go ahead and capture this So we have something called a published lens that allows you to capture the data at a moment in time based on how you sorted and filtered it. And so I'm going to call this particular data set duplicates to review. I'll save that. I'm going to publish that, so that means this is going to be materialized as a physical data set in the library, so one of my team members can log in and they'll immediately see it. And that's because we support WebSockets. That's what allows for the collaborative experience as well. And I don't need it for my purposes. I actually don't want to include dupes, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove them. Great. So now we come back and we've got the rest of our data without the dupes. The next thing I want to do is make sure we've got all the right transaction methods. We should have branch deposits for cash and also ATM deposits. Great. So I validated that. Again, all of the records are being considered here. We see it's about a 55 to 45% breakdown. That makes sense. Great. That sanity check is done. Last thing I need to do is start applying some interesting business rules to this data. Because as an SME in this particular area, I know that we want to focus on the transactions that are between $5,000 and $10,000, because anything above $10,000 is going to be reviewed by FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and anything below $5,000, we'll say for now, just isn't worth our time to review. So I'm going to use this filtergram, and I'm going to zoom in on just the area that I'm interested in, which is between $5,000 and $10,000 transactions. Notice that's going to automatically or dynamically reshape my histogram up here and make it really easy for me to hone in and filter on that window of data I'm interested in. So I'm going to invert that and remove everything except for that particular window of data. I'll save that, and you'll notice as we're doing this, we are building out our data lineage and our set of steps, capturing our recipe along the way. Great, so now we're down to 8.7 million records. Next thing I want to do is I want to aggregate this data. So shaping data in Paxata is awesome because you can take advantage of the underlying use of how we optimize Spark to do all this and work with the full data set. So I'm going to actually roll up the data at the account number level, and I just want to understand the count of the transactions as well as the total amount. So I'll grab the sum of the amount, and notice all this is happening live. I'll wait a few seconds, and great. We've got 6.8 million records now aggregated as such. The last thing I want to do is to bring up a filter on the count, and I just want to focus on those individuals that are applying a lot of transactions in this particular window. So I'm going to remove any transaction that occurred once or twice within that week's time frame. I'll commit that step to my step editor, clear that, my filtergram will refresh, my grid will refresh, and great. We've got anywhere from 3 to 10 transactions. All right, so we talked about completeness. We've been working with the full data set so far. We're down to about 300,000 rows. Now I want to bring in some context. So for each of these accounts, what do we know about them? Where do they reside? What is the geographic information? That's going to be important in order to plot this potential AML activity on a map in, for example, Tableau. So I'm going to do a lookup in Paxata, which is how you do blending. And I'm going to go out to the data library. And in the interest of time, I know I'm looking for the high-risk table, and that comes in from Oracle. And I'm going to select it. Now what happens here, and unique to Paxata, is the system is scanning all the data and looking for all the ways that you could join these two data sets together. And it figured out there's really only one match that makes sense, and that's based on matching account name from the transactional data with a column called cust account number in the high-risk accounts table. And this is awesome because Paxata is detecting joins for me, calculating a join score or percentage of overlap, and showing me a row-by-row preview below in the grid. And by the way, I have a lot of power here to change the lookup type and even customize the extent to which fuzzy matching is being applied. Right? So that's very useful in certain scenarios, and definitely a place where Excel really struggles trying to do fuzzy matching. So I'm going to leave it as an automatic match. That makes sense. It found what I'm looking for. And you know what? I just want to focus on those customers and their transactions that are on the high-risk listing. So I'm going to select just the match records. So just like that, I've basically done an inner join, or avoided having to do 2 or 3 VLOOKUPs in order to get this view. I'm going to save that. Great. Now notice I've got my 2 data sets that are stitched together. You see a new color for the customer, the high-risk account information. Now what I want to do here is I got to make sure that the geographic information is going to be accurate. So I'm going to bring up a filtergram on the customer city, and I'm going to see that unfortunately there are some issues here. Notice that New York City has a weird spelling here. In fact, if we sort this, you'll see the issue that we saw earlier with Excel, which is sometimes you've got manually entered data or data from different source systems, and you've got misspellings, you've got variations, the data is just not normalized. Well, in Paxata, we have a capability that is called cluster and edit, which is going to allow me to let the system do the heavy lifting. So I'm going to run cluster and edit on all the values in the city column, and within a couple of seconds, the system will scan all of the data values in this column and come back and show me there are 32 clusters or groups of values that potentially should be normalized. And this is based on a phonetic algorithm called metaphone, and there are other ones that are useful for different purposes, but I realized I've got an easy way now to go in and clean up my data just with a matter of clicks. And having the context of this business data, I'm able to make these decisions. I don't have to wait on anybody else. And this particular scenario looks like a lot of these are legitimate. I'm just going to select the whole page and just scroll down. In some cases, you might notice there are false positives. I can easily go in and remove those, such as here we've got Dulles. We don't want that in there. Let's remove it. Now I'm going to go ahead and save that. Just like that, we've applied in bulk updates to hundreds of thousands of records, or even millions, depending on your scenario, and we are down to 352 unique values. That is at least a 20% improvement in data quality. This looks much better. Now, with that said, let us go ahead and add a final lens and call this last lens my dashboard view. So I will save that particular view. I will publish it. This represents my clean, complete, contextual data. I'm going to consume it in Tableau, and if you allow me a minute to just fast forward in time about, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes, I will have generated something that looks like this. Or perhaps a member of my team that's good at Tableau. It's really quick and easy, or whatever BI tool you're using to visualize and interact with the data. Now we notice that there might be an issue where, okay, I'm presenting this analysis and a stakeholder or my team member, an auditor asks, well, how did you come up with these numbers? For example, why is there such a high potential AML in El Paso? Well, with a single click, I can take advantage of a capability called Click to Prep. That's going to bring me back into Paxata and show me the very project that produced that output data, filtered exactly on the transactions that I want to look at. So this is great for, especially that we're able to capture all of the data lineage and explain, okay, I had 11 steps. This is similar to the project that we went through, and I can easily walk somebody through all of my steps. Oh, and by the way, any business context, I can add to the versions panel here. Every step of the way, Paxata is automatically saving a version. Right? So you don't have to worry about an unlimited undo. You are promised unlimited undo in Paxata. Now, with that said, let me jump back to the presentation. I know that we are running out of time, but let me just take a moment to highlight, well, what happened with our customer scenario? Just like you saw, they were able to use Paxata capabilities like I showed to reduce that process down to a single day. And they were to improve their matching and data quality from 25 to 77%. They saved a ton of money on avoiding headcount increases and huge fines. And they were able to do that all by enabling the line of business instead of having to rely on IT. And they were able to use MicroStrategy and Tableau to consume that data. So that was a fantastic scenario. Last thing I'll mention is that you might not be doing anti-money laundering, but perhaps you are doing an end-user analysis or doing data discovery, onboarding, enabling self-service BI in your organization, you can see that how Paxata can be useful in all of those scenarios and more. So just to summarize, with Excel, you are restricted based on those 4 weaknesses that we talked about: the data limitations, the manual and error-prone nature of Excel, no collaboration or workflow reuse, and the lack of process transparency and data governance. And you get all of that with Paxata. So with that, I'd like to just go ahead and leave a 2 minutes for any questions. Hopefully there's one that we can answer, and of course we'll follow up with each of you individually if you have more questions that we can't tackle now.
Great job, Mike. Is there a limit for how much data we can put in at once? And we thought that was a good one to share.
Technically, not really. And the reason I say that is because the limitation is based on the number of Spark cores that you have in your cluster, right? So Paxata is definitely best applied on data sizes that range between the tens and hundreds of millions of records. That's where we see the vast majority of our customer use cases. Of course, we get requests for supporting billions of records. We're not quite there yet, but I have personally seen 1.5 billion records being interactively prepared and profiled in Paxata. So great question.
Fantastic. All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining today. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And for anyone else who have any last-minute questions that are just coming in, we'll be sure to follow up with you and let you know how to get your hands on Paxata. So thanks so much to you, Mike, for joining us today. We are excited about that, and this will be posted and available on demand to everyone, so you can absolutely go back and reference the material. So we hope everyone has a great day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.